back, and we have back with us again Morning Rush, explaining the topic that we were discussing earlier. Vinoo Varghese, a federal criminal defense attorney who has tried similar cases as Judge Jackson. That earlier we played an exchange where multiple senators have brought up Judge Jackson's past rulings when it comes to child pornography cases. So again, thank you for being here this morning. Why are sentencing guidelines for this crime this issue that Republicans keep focusing on?
Well, I think it's great theater. Obviously, when you talk, they're trying to attack her on something. Her record has actually been one of, generally speaking, of moderation. And what she's done in these, particularly in child porn cases, is actually think, which is what you want as a want in a federal judge. She has looked at the guidelines. The guidelines are ridiculous. I mean, for example, you get more jail time based on images in a video. So, for example, a 1-minute clip can have thousands of images, greatly enhancing a sentence. So the overwhelming majority of federal judges in the country have railed against these kind of guidelines. And that's all she's doing is to look. The guidelines are advisory. They're not mandatory. The Supreme Court ruled in 2005 they're not mandatory. So what she's done is look at each case individually and see whether it's fair. The guidelines are so skewed or so badly drafted that a person who crosses state lines to have sex with a minor will receive less jail time than a person who receives a video or downloads a pornographic video. That to me doesn't make sense, and that's the kind of things that Judge Jackson is talking about.
So let's take a step back and kind of get a look at the bigger picture here. What is the reasoning behind why judges would give a lesser sentence for this type of crime?
Because when you look at it, and the question becomes, okay, is this person someone who created child pornography? Is this person somebody who's profiting off child pornography? Or is this person somebody who has an illness, a sickness, who likes to look at this stuff, right? So if a person has a illness, then you have to treat it as such and make appropriate sentencing decisions versus a person who's actively manufacturing this kind of stuff versus a person who's distributing this stuff versus a person who's actually involved in actual exploitation of minors versus a person who's actually looking at or consuming the material.
And Senate Judiciary Chair Dick Durbin did mention that Congress could be partly to blame over the lack of guidelines. So what is the role of lawmakers when deciding what the guidelines are, and then therefore how judges ultimately set sentences?
So this issue has been coming up for I would say almost decades now. Certainly, I had a case back in 2009 where I convinced a federal judge in New York to issue a dramatically reduced sentence based on the fact, and I demonstrated to him how wrong these guidelines were. Particularly, what was very powerful for this judge and taking into consideration was the fact that a person who crosses state lines and has sex with a minor was going to get less jail than a person who passively views child pornography or receives child pornography. And the way that the laws are created, and Senator Durbin is correct, Congress is to blame. So today, how are you going to receive child pornography? It's usually via the internet. That gives you an automatic mandatory 5-year minimum. It used to be these laws were drafted because basically possession doesn't give you a mandatory minimum. But how today, in today's world, how are you going to possess child pornography other than getting it in the mail or via email or downloading from the internet? So these laws don't make sense. And that's all that Judge Jackson is pointing out or has pointed out. But certainly it's good political theater because it's a nice way for them to score points potentially and try to convince anybody who may be on the fence, because who wants to be fair towards child pornographers? But the issue is much more nuanced. And I think it's actually a very unfair line of attack.
Very interesting. We heard Judge Jackson say, I believe it was 2 days ago when we first started hearing about questioning, was that the guidelines, they have not kept up with technology. This is 2022, and a lot of those guidelines are so far back in the past that, things have changed, and that should change as well. Vinoo Varghese, a federal criminal defense attorney, thank you so much for joining us today.
My pleasure.